Okay, begin with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. Good morning. Okay, so today we will be taking Sutta number 32 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is the larger discourse in the Gosinga forest. And this is on page 307. I think just about all of you have come up what is called the Bodhi walk in front of the big Buddha hall. And you see there are statues of 18 great disciples of the Buddha there. And what do you notice about these 18 statues? Don't say that they're made out of stone. What is particularly striking about them?
Their expressions, they're all different.
Okay, say that again.
Their expressions and they're all different.
The expressions are all different. And maybe the expression is a key to something more than just the face, but you could say that the expression of the face is a key to what? Well, yeah, but something a little more persistent. Sometimes I don't know if I phrase the question.
Personality?
Say again?
Personality.
Exactly, exactly. So there are different expressions on the face, not only on the face, but different, the body is held in different ways. Some of them are sitting very serenely, very relaxed. Some look like they're bursting with electrical energy. Some look, the facial expression looks almost violent, even though they're arhats, so they have no more hatred or ill will, but very fierce, intense expression on the face. Some look very calm and tranquil. Some are engaged in meditation. Some look like they're engaged in teaching. Some look like they're engaged in a debate or an argument. And there's one statue that you have to see it in the winter when it's snowing. It's actually the statue of Mahagosinga. It's the right hand like this. When it's snowing, the snow builds up in the hand. And when you pass by, it looks like he's about to throw a snowball at you. Okay, so all of these disciples all have basically the same enlightenment, the same realization, the same liberation. So there's no difference between the enlightenment of one, the enlightenment of the others, between the liberation of one, the liberation of the others. But it's just like, maybe to use an analogy, it's just like having the same sunlight pass through different stained glass windows. So the image that will appear on the window is different because of the configuration, the color of pieces of glass on the window, but the light shining through them is all the same. And so we find quite interestingly that the great disciples of the Buddha, though they all have the same enlightenment, the same realization, same liberation, but their characters are very different, depending probably upon the accumulation of different tendencies, different interests, different proclivities, different styles of cultivation over many previous lives. And so in this sutta on the larger discourse in the Gosinga forest, we're going to see how each of, or a number of disciples expresses his own understanding of what will be an ideal monk. Okay, so the sutta begins with the Buddha is living in this Gosinga sala-tree forest together with a number of the most prominent elder disciples. There was the Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamoggallana, the Venerable Mahagosinga, the Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Revata, the Venerable Ananda, and other prominent elder disciples. And of the ones mentioned here, we have stone statues along the walkway of Sariputta, Moggallana, Revata, Anuruddha, Ananda. 5 of them are represented by statues. The 2 of them who are so prominent we don't have statues, that is Mahagosinga and Venerable Ananda. Does anybody know why those 2? There are no statues of those 2 disciples. You're wrong.
I can only guess that Ananda didn't get arahantship until he's the last one of the 500.
Well, he got his arahantship after the Buddha's passing away, but I think he could have been represented there. And certainly Mahagosinga isn't represented. Oh wait, do you know why?
I don't know, I can only guess.
Guess.
Probably because it depends on who made those statues. Maybe they didn't go to the Shaolin temple.
Maybe it didn't.
They didn't go to Shaolin temple.
To Shaolin temple.
Yeah. Because I think the 18 arahants idea came from Shaolin.
Nobody has? Anybody else have an idea? I have an idea. I'm not sure whether it's right or not. I thought maybe one of you would be more authoritative on this than I am, but I could just offer a guess. In this respect, Zhuangyan maybe is a little different from a typical Chinese temple, but I think in most Chinese temples, on the altar, along with the statue of Sakyamuni Buddha, don't they usually have statues of Ananda and Mahagosinga? They don't?
No, that's actually, I think that's the southern tradition. That's in Sri Lanka. I think mostly in Chinese temple you have the 2 bodhisattvas.
I know you have Manjushri and yeah, Manjushri and Pushi.
One is on the
Yeah.
elephant and the other is a lion.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody on the internet.
It's a good question to pose, yeah. Anyway, I remember when I first went to Asia, the first country that I went to was Vietnam, because I was originally ordained as a Vietnamese monk. And I remember in the temple where I was staying in Vietnam, right up alongside they had the Buddha Shakyamuni, not the Amitabha Buddha. And next to Shakyamuni Buddha, there were statues of Ananda and Mahagosinga and Ananda. I don't recall the 18 arhats in that temple. But it struck me that perhaps in a certain period, maybe of Chinese history, or maybe even going back to Indian history, they would have images. This would be the Sarvastivada school, emphasizes the apostolic transmission through Mahagosinga to Ananda. Whereas in the Theravada tradition, the two monks will be up in the front, with the Buddha will be Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. But I think in the northern tradition, they don't put the two chief disciples, but rather the two disciples who are considered to have been the first two patriarchs. Maybe I'm stepping into waters where I'm not qualified to swim. But that's what occurred to me to explain the absence of Ananda and Mahagosinga amongst the 18 statues. Otherwise, I don't know the explanation. But maybe I'll ask, perhaps Fa Yao Fasha might know. I'll ask him at lunchtime if I see him. Okay, anyway, let us return to the text. Okay, so one evening, the Venerable Mahamoggallana comes out from his meditation, and he goes to Venerable Mahagosinga and says to him, "Friend Kassapa, let us go to the Venerable Sariputta to listen to the Dhamma." Okay, so Moggallana, Mahagosinga go to the Venerable Sariputta, and as they're walking, probably through a path in the forest, whereas Venerable Anuruddha appears at some point to join them. Then Venerable Ananda sees them walking along the path, and he joins them. He goes to the Venerable Revata and says, "Let us go and join them and listen to the Venerable Sariputta." Okay, and so they all gather around the place where Venerable Sariputta is staying. Okay, then they're all settled there in paragraph 4. Then Venerable Sariputta speaks, he addresses the Venerable Ananda, and he says that this Gosinga, the word Gosinga actually means cow's horn. Perhaps the forest was shaped like a cow's horn. So this Gosinga sala-tree wood is delightful. It's probably a full moon night, so the night is lit by moonlight. And the sal-trees are all in blossom. And the sal-trees, the sal flowers have a very sweet scent. And so it seems as though heavenly scents are floating in the air. Then Sariputta asks Ananda, what kind of monk could illuminate this Gosinga sal-tree forest? What kind of monk would shine or beautify or adorn? I think that would be actually a better rendering. What kind of bhikkhu would adorn this Gosinga sala-tree wood? Okay, so now Ananda is going to answer in a way which is sort of determined by his own aptitudes, his own interests, his own proclivities. Do you remember Venerable Ananda amongst all of the disciples of the Buddha? the Buddha pointed him out as being a chief disciple in a particular respect. In what respect was that?
Great memory, learning, and erudition.
Wow. Great memory?
Learning and erudition.
Well, learning and erudition,
It's
I
kind of the
think.
same thing.
Yeah. But great memory and great erudition. There's also something else. I think great retention. Well, actually retention is the same as memory. Great gati, ditti. Ditti is something like practical wisdom.
Guardian of the Dhamma.
He was appointed, that's the word used, the expression used to describe them in the commentaries is guardian of the Dhamma. I'm not sure that it occurs in the suttas at all. But it's because of his memory, his erudition, his capacity for his retention, and his practical intelligence that he was called the guardian of the Dhamma. And so Ananda had a special function because of his great memory and because he always lived very close to the Buddha. So he served something as the treasurer of the Dhamma. And so whenever the Buddha would give a discourse, Venerable Ananda would immediately would be listening and be able to retain it in his mind and to relate it to the other monks. And if for some reason Ananda could not be present when the Buddha gave a discourse, he had made a request of the Buddha always to repeat the discourse when they met it on a later occasion, and then Ananda would preserve it. And so in this way, in the Theragatha, Ananda says that I have heard 84,000, or I have preserved 84,000 bundles of Dhamma. He says, I learned 82,000 from the Buddha and 2,000 from the disciples. Of course, the figure 84,000 shouldn't be taken too literally. It's almost a symbolic figure in Indian, at least in Buddhist literature, to represent a great number. Okay, so Ananda is going to speak according to his own interests and capacities. And so he says, here, friend Sariputta, a monk has learned much. He remembers what he has learned, and he consolidates, or this expression can also mean stores up, accumulates what he has learned. So he remembers it and he stores it up and perhaps organizes it into some kind of systematic whole. Because if you remember so many things, you can't keep your mind like like Bante's bookshelf, with the books just placed wherever they happen to wind up. But you have to organize it like a library. You know, the discourses on this topic, 5 aggregates here, discourses on the sense bases here, discourses on dependent origination there, discourses on satipatthana there, and so on. Such teachings as are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and the right phrasing. So these are 2 important aspects of the Buddha's teaching. These are words which are used again and again to describe the Buddha's teaching. It said that the teaching is with Atta means meaning. So the teaching of the Buddha It has to be meaningful. And also the word atta has another meaning besides meaning, which also is significant. It means benefit or good. Benefit, goodness, profit, not in material, not in a monetary sense, but being profitable or beneficial. And the word atta also means goal, pointing to the goal, which for the Buddha's teaching is Nibbana. And so the Buddha's teaching is with meaning, it's meaningful because it's beneficial, and it's beneficial because it leads to one's welfare and happiness and culminates in the goal. And then the teaching is also with the right vyanjana, which means sometimes the word vyanjana in relation to food, it means the different side dishes that accompany the rice. Like in the typical Indian meal, sort of the main staple is the rice. It could be chapati, but actually in the Buddha's time it was clearly rice. And then there would be other dishes along the side, and those are called vyanjana. Anybody from an Indian background? Do you use that expression in Pakistan? Catherine? What language do you use?
Urdu and Hindi is the same.
Urdu.
And Hindi is the same.
Same. And you don't use vyanjana or vyanjana? What do you call the side dishes? In Urdu, what are the side dishes called?
They're usually named by whatever it is.
But there's not a general name for
Well,
it?
there is no general name, not that I know of. But you know, I'm no authority. It's generally named by whatever.
In Andhra Pradesh, if you ask somebody to a meal, you invite them to rice, and then the side dishes are the curries.
Yeah, but I think is curry a British expression?
Well, in Andhra Pradesh, people use it.
In Andhra,
It's
Andhra
salan.
Pradesh.
It's salan in salan.
in southern India.
No, just in northern India. And northern India is salan.
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 Mm. Okay, anyway. I guess languages change. Okay, so in relation to language, vyanjana is the expression, the formulation or the phrasing. And so the Buddha's teaching has to have not only the right meaning, but it has to be expressed properly. So this is why we could see that the Buddha's teaching, as we find it in the Nikayas, is always very systematic. For example, when the Buddha gives a discourse, he'll begin by saying, I will teach you the 3 kinds of this, or the 4 kinds of that. Then he'll say, what are the 4 kinds? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he'll take each of these 4 items, and what, O monks, is number 1? What is number 2? What is number 3? What is number 4? He explains each of them, then he sums it up at the end. So you can see it's very well ordered, very well presented. So this is why it's said to be with the proper phrasing. And then the teaching affirms a brahmacharya, a holy life or a spiritual life that is utterly perfect or complete and pure. Okay, so that is the way of describing the Buddha's teachings. And now this is the way the monk goes about the learning. So it says, such teachings as these he has learned much of, remembered, mastered verbally, investigated with the mind, and penetrated well by view. We have 5 aspects of learning mentioned here. And these 5 aspects actually constitute, you could say, a complete course in education, or a complete course in intellectual training. So first, the teachings, one has to learn much of them. And the word that's translated here as learn much of is, in Pali, it's Bahu Sutta, which means literally heard much of. Because in the Buddha's day, the teachings were not written down. And so nowadays we describe somebody who is learned as a well-read person. But in the Buddha's day, we say that somebody is a learned person is one who has heard much. So to learn the teachings, the first step is to be present, to be in the presence of a teacher, and to actually hear the teacher expound the teachings. Okay, then when one hears the teaching, if one is not sufficiently attentive, the teaching will, you can hear much of it, but it will just come in one ear and go out the other. So what's necessary is to remember the teachings, or to retain them in mind. And in the Buddha's time, nowadays, our faculty of memory has become atrophied to a great extent. It's lost its precision, it's lost its retentiveness because we've come to depend upon the written word. And so as we rely so much on writing, on reading and writing, we don't use our memories very much. And for that reason, very difficult to remember things. But in the Buddha's time, because there were no books, and because especially the religious specialists didn't have books to rely on, or writing, they couldn't sit there taking notes. So they had to develop the capacity for memorizing to the point where after listening to a discourse, even for a whole day, one will remember everything that has been said. It can astonish us, but even now in India there are Brahmins who know whole books of the Vedas by memory. And in Burma especially, there are monks who know whole Nikayas by memory. And some monks who know the whole Sutta by memory. And even a few monks, maybe enough, they could be counted on one hand, maybe 2 hands, who know the entire Tripitaka by memory. So they usually test them in order to test their memory, they have to pass a test. And of course, to become like a Tripitaka expert in Burma. But you can't test the person by saying, okay, start at the beginning of the Tripitaka and let's hear you read it through. Because you'd be sitting there for months and months listening to the person recite. So how do they find out that the person passes and gets the degree of being a Tripitaka expert? What they do is to just take books at random and read a paragraph, and they then say to him, continue. Then he has to know the place where the paragraph is being read from, and as soon as the examiner finishes, he has to pick up immediately and continue. Then to make sure that he knows if he's, say, being tested to become an expert in the 4 Nikayas, then they'll read passages at random from the 4 Nikayas. If he used to be an expert in the Tripitaka, all 3 baskets, then they'll read passages from all 3 of the baskets, the Vinaya, the Sutta Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, and he has to be able to pick it up. But there are some who can do that. When I visited Sri Lanka in 2006, I met one from Burma. When we left the guest house where we were staying, he stopped us and said, "Oh, I forgot my watch." I'm only joking. But even though this feat might seem very amazing, but what one finds, you can try this if you like. If you practice memorizing a little bit, at the beginning it's difficult, it seems impossible. But as you go on with it, practicing day by day, week after week, month after month, the capacity of memory gets trained and strengthened. Just like somebody who wants to become a track runner, if you ask him to run for an hour at the beginning, he thinks, "Oh, that's impossible." But after training, he can run for a whole day, not feel too tired. Okay, so it trains the memory. Then to keep a grip on one's memorization, what is done is this is called mastering the text verbally, which means that one recites it out loud. So it has to go over the text again and again to recite it verbally. What's done in Buddhist countries, at least it used to be done, at night there would be these hallways or outside these walkways, and the monks walk back and forth with just the path lit by a little kerosene lantern, reciting the text that they've memorized over and over for an hour, a couple of hours. And in this way, the text gets imprinted on the mind so that one doesn't lose it. Okay, so those 3 are actually concerned with, you could say, the learning aspect. Hearing much, retaining in mind, reciting verbally. The next 2 are concerned with using one's learning to build up panya, or wisdom. So the 4th step, one has to investigate the teaching with the mind. That is, one has to understand it and sort of raise questions about it. What is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of that? Why is this said in this place, and why is that said in that place? How does this part of the sutta cohere with that part of the sutta? Okay, so now one is working to get into how does this discourse apply to one's life? What are its practical implications? How does one utilize the sutta as a set of guideposts for training? So in this way, one is investigating with the mind in order to draw out the meaning from the vyanjana, from the wording. And then it's not enough to have simply a conceptual or intellectual understanding, but one has to gain direct insight into the teaching. And that is what is covered by the 4th step, that one penetrates the teachings thoroughly by view, by insight, by wisdom. Okay, so those are what we call the 5 steps of the classical Buddhist education. And then Ananda also is not only very learned, but also he was a gifted expounder or teacher of the Dhamma. And so he brings that particular skill into the discourse here, and he says that he teaches the Dhamma to the 4 assemblies with well-rounded and coherent statements. What is meant by the 4 assemblies? Anybody know?
The Sangha, Bhikkhu, Bhikkhuni, the lay people,
Exactly, yeah. Okay, the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, monks and nuns, and upasaka and upasika, the lay men and the lay women. So he teaches well-rounded and coherent statements. The statements have to be reasonable, balanced, properly expressed. And then the purpose of the exposition is for the eradication of the anusaya, the underlying tendencies. What are the underlying tendencies? All 7 of them? Dina, you want to take a shot?
Thank you.
Anybody like to take a shot at the 7 underlying tendencies?
Greed has to be in there somewhere. Greed? No?
It's not, the word greed isn't used. Let me see if I can get that. I think I have it. Somebody want to try?
Well, it's Sutta 18.
Not allowed. You saw there was a note number and you looked at the note, right? Okay, we find them at Sutta 18. Let me test myself. You look at 18. We see whether we're going to flunk Bhante, kick him off the seat. Bhante, you have to get the right order also. If you get the order mixed up, you lose points. No, please have mercy. Kamaraga. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's sensual lust. Patika, that's aversion, the underlying tendency to aversion. Ditti, dittanusaya, the tendency to views. Bhavaraga, the lust or craving for existence. Is that there? Is it there?
Desire to be.
yeah, that's it.
Desire to be.
Oh, that's there, okay. It's just Bhavaraga, mana, conceit, vichikicha, that is doubt, and avijja, ignorance. Was the order correct?
No.
No.
That we can see.
Down to views and then doubt was next.
Views comes before doubt.
No, views and then doubt.
Yeah. So views, doubt, and ignorance.
Conceit.
Doubt, conceit. Desire
Views,
to
doubt, conceit, and ignorance.
be,
Desire
desire to be.
Existence and everything.
Okay, anyway. We're getting them right in the wrong order.
Your concept.
I can give myself A-. Okay, anyway, this is the purpose, to eradicate the underlying tendencies, and one who is fully eradicated the underlying tendencies, is fully liberated or in a Okay, so Ananda says that this kind of bhikkhu could adorn the Gosinga sala-tree forest. Okay, then Sariputta turns to Venerable Revata. We have Venerable Revata also amongst the stone statues. Venerable Revata was appointed by the Buddha to be one of the foremost disciples. What was he foremost in? What was his specialty?
Meditation.
How'd you guess?
I did.
You knew it.
Well, I had read the footnote, yeah.
That's cheating. You're not supposed to read the footnotes.
I thought that's why they were there.
You can read them, but not while I'm testing. Okay, so Sariputta turns to Revata and says, "Friend Revata, the Venerable Ananda has spoken." The text uses the expression, I think it's yatapatibhana. That's according to his own idea, his own intuition, his own what inspires him. So we can say his own inspiration. And now I'm asking you, what kind of monk could illuminate this Gosinga sala-tree forest? And then Revata says, here a monk delights in solitary meditation. He takes delight in solitary meditation. I don't remember what Pali word is being translated as solitary meditation. Could have been patisalana. Okay, he is devoted to internal serenity of mind. This is ajjatam cheto samatha. So this means that he practices what is called samatha meditation, the meditation for calming the mind. And the practice of samatha meditation aims at samadhi, at deep concentration. So he is devoted to internal serenity of mind. He does not neglect, the word here is jhana. So he practices the jhanas. He enters the first, second, third, fourth jhanas. He possesses vipassana, that is insight. So he also practices insight meditation. And he dwells in empty huts. That is, empty huts are considered the ideal place, or one of the ideal places for practicing meditation. The small huts in the forest, so through the hut one is protected from rain, humidity, mosquitoes, snakes, biting flies. Okay, so Revata praises the monk who delights in meditation. Of course, all the monks, in order to achieve any kind of realization, one has to practice meditation. But Revata was probably one who didn't specialize much in learning or in preaching, teaching the Dhamma, but he was fond of going off into secluded places deep in the forest in order to continue to develop meditation, even after reaching liberation. Okay, now they turn to Venerable Anuruddha, and they ask Anuruddha what kind of monk could illuminate the Gosinga sala-tree forest. Among the stone statues Does anybody know which one is Anuruddha? Who's Anuruddha?
Which one is, or who was it?
Which of the stone
Oh,
statues?
that I can't remember. No, I can't remember which of the
No.
Buddhists.
Do you know both? No?
The fourth one
Fourth one to the left. Going up. What is the fourth one doing? Did you get it?
to the left. That's divine eye is supposed to be seen.
No. One of them looks like he's sleeping, right? Do you remember? It seems to me, this is just my hypothesis, that somehow in the Chinese tradition, the identity of Anuruddha may have gotten mixed up with the identity of Moggallana. Because in the Pali Suttas, Moggallana, before his attainment of arhatship, had a problem with tina mida, with sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness. And he would doze off, and the Buddha had to come to him and sort of stir him up and goad him on to practice. And so maybe if the identities got mixed up, we have Anuruddha. That's just my hypothesis. I don't know, otherwise I don't know how to explain why Anuruddha seems to be asleep. I remember years ago reading in the, it's called Vajra Bodhisi, the magazine from the city of 10,000 Buddhas. Venerable Xuanhua said that, and obviously he's speaking from a knowledge of the Chinese tradition, maybe even North Indian tradition, that Anuruddha had gone blind, but that he had the divine eye. But there's nothing in the Pali tradition that indicates that Anuruddha was blind. And quite to the contrary, there are some texts with Anuruddha traveling alone, which would have been difficult for him if he was blind. But his specialty was called the Dipa Chakku, the divine eye. And this is the special kind of faculty of spiritual vision by which one could see events taking place at great distances, even in other world systems and in other realms of existence. And so when Anuruddha is asked the question, then he replies, "Hear, friend Sariputta, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, a bhikkhu surveys 1,000 worlds, or 1,000 world systems. Just as a man with good eyesight, he might climb to the upper chamber of a mansion or a palace, and then look down, he might be able to see with his eyes 1,000 wheel rims. I don't know what the wheel rims would be doing out at the palace. Maybe they have factories where they produce wheels for chariots and carriages, and they would, when making them, they would lay them out in a field. But this man would survey with his vision 1,000 wheel rims. And just so, this monk with a divine eye might survey 1,000 world systems. And it's interesting that the text uses this image of wheels to describe a world system. Because I'm sure that many of you have seen photographs of galaxies taken with these very powerful telescopes, and what do many of them look like from a great distance?
Spirals.
Yeah, but the spiral is just like a wheel. Which I don't want to say that Buddhist cosmology is always 100% like modern cosmology. There are sometimes, we have to admit it, some mistakes or differences in the Buddhist cosmology. But this strikes me as something quite astonishing, this correspondence